Welcome to the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast, where we celebrate the craft of poetry. Each week, we feature interviews with incredible poets and artists, including Olivia Gatwood and A.E. Stallings, and original poetry read by the authors. I'm your host, James Moorhead, Poet Laureate of Dublin, California, and author of Canvas and Portraits of Red and Gray. In this mini episode of the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast, I'll read and discuss a poem I wrote that was recently published by the online cultural journal Prometheus Dreaming. It's a beautifully designed and curated journal that combines art and poetry, and I'll leave a link in the show notes. I'll first read the poem, then discuss the origin of the poem. That Time I Was Left for Dead Downstage by James Moorhead. 8th grade, my big break. The play was something Western. I had a single line and every actor's dream, a dramatic death. I had to learn how to act with a beard glued on in pieces, the fake hair tickling the bottom of my nose. I wore it home for a day to get used to the feel. My family swallowed giggles during dinner. Opening night approached. My heart raced, imagining the curtain opening on 100 seated shadows. That single line I kept forgetting, whispers from the director. Time ran out. Hurried discussions. It was decided. My debut line was cut. With a full beard glued on in pieces, tickling the bottom of my nose, a long black coat and top hat, boots one size too big, I walked into the spotlight, said nothing, was shot and left for dead at the edge of the stage. I remember lying there, unable to move, eyes closed, silently mouthing my line over and over and over, sensing classmates' footsteps avoiding my corpse. First, this was a true story. I was extremely shy back in middle school, and it wasn't until university that I came out of my shyness shell and found a way to be comfortable in the spotlight. I was terrified, not just nervous, speaking in public, presenting in front of the class. Dry mouth, heart racing, terrified. The 8th grade play about something Western was not a voluntary elective. It was a class project. I think I landed, air quotes, the role because I was tall and that suited the character. I had one line, was in full beard, glued on, and was shot and left for dead to start the first act. And I was so nervous I could never remember the line. That's all true. Turning the anecdote into a poem was tricky, and it took multiple revisions. It's a humorous anecdote and slight, but something many people can relate to. A fear of forgetting, of being exposed, imposter syndrome, of the spotlight. I decided to lean into the slightness of the anecdote by editing the original version into short, sharp lines, clinical statements, more like a police report documenting the crime scene in shorthand. I had an entertaining anecdote and a form that worked, but no ending. That's where I sprinkled in some creative license. I remember being relieved lying on the stage, never having needed to remember my line, and the whole experience was fun. But for this poem, I decided to make the experience more melancholic, by repeating the line over and over. And I knew I wanted the last word in the poem to be corpse, and it took multiple edits to find the best way to make that work. The original title of this poem was Stage Fright, a solid, functional title, but not an attention grabber. Poet Morgan Liphart, who I interviewed on an earlier episode, check it out, she's a wonderful poet, gave me a powerful piece of advice. Think about poem titles more like headlines that makes you want to read more. That doesn't mean the title is clickbait or manipulative, but rather the title sets up the poem and pulls you in. She said in her experience, it has helped her get more poems placed successfully. With that advice ringing in my ears, Stage Fright became That Time I Was Left for Dead Downstage. I tested the title with some friends, and it immediately drew a laugh. I've been asked whether or not I can remember that line now, the line I forgot many years later, and the answer is definitely not. It would be ironic and a terrific story if I could. And unfortunately, there weren't any camera phones filming everything back when I was in middle school, so the only record of that moment in theater will be this poem. The Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast is written and produced by James Moorhead. You can follow me on Twitter at Dublin Ranch, subscribe to the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast, and follow us on viewlesswings.com or on Instagram at viewlesswings.